I don't. If you do,
The new variants are very, very easy to catch, and 6 feet
Oh, man,
probably
I'm
was
gonna-
never enough.
I'm gonna
And
care about everybody's comfort
12
as much as they care about mine.
right. I don't care about your
If you wanna be comfortable, make yourself comfortable. I'm gonna make myself comfortable too.
I'm fine with that. So I'll
I
write it.
just work with seniors every single day that have no other option for people to help them. It's the only thing, so.
State bar sees it, they'll be like, Ron, we're gonna have to take your license, because actually, that
Because you follow the mandate, that's not a law.
well, it is a law, but it expired 9 months ago. Like, don't even get me started, dude. I don't wanna have the conversation. Are we live?
we are
Correct.
Okay. My final word, the state Supreme Court has had this case in front of it since last May, and they refuse to take it up. Because Benton County already, a judge ruled. So, anyway.
I'll send it to her, I don't
I
care.
just got off the driving a bus, so that's why I had mine on.
I'll let you know.
Dude, I would love to drive a
So
bus.
I had to make sure
Okay, no, I wouldn't.
I have
I didn't hear you.
I said I would love to drive a bus. I think about that, like it'd be so awesome. And then I think about what I did to my bus driver. Nope, I don't think I'd have the restraint she had.
I've been driving all day, but
I would like to
or
buy an old
Saturday,
school
got
bus
my
and turn
vaccine
it
on
into
Saturday,
an RV.
boy, I could tell.
So that
I've seen
has
a lot of
always
them online.
intrigued me, but I'd want something like
I'm sure they leave a
like
little
an
bit
old
of
Greyhound
traffic
from
back in
like
the
the
day.
50s, like
Yeah.
something super cool.
Yeah,
But then I think I don't know if like it's gonna sit in my yard for 9 years or 10 years. Like, so Ron, when are you gonna get rid of that? Well,
I've got plans for it.
yeah, exactly. Like an old streamliner, like just that would be cool.
owner
Because they have plumbing there, they have bathrooms. You just gotta
Right.
figure out how to get the water, like a reservoir. It would be
They
super.
even got wood burning stoves in.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've seen what people. Man, I moved to get out of the camera and you moved. The
1,
camera.
2, 3, 4. We got. It's an owl. It can see everywhere.
We
You
have
make a
2 on the
noise, it
screen,
poke,
too.
it gets you.
Oh, really?
It takes a 2/3 majority to convict, which would require no fewer than 7 Republicans to vote against Trump.
NPR's Windsor Johnston. The Department of Justice Inspector General has opened an investigation into efforts within the agency to overturn the 2020 election. This after reports a Justice Department official tried to find a way to change Georgia's election outcome. From member station WABE, Emma Hurd reports.
The DOJ inspector.
Thank you, Mark.
I think that was Christine.
It was me.
Christine muted him.
And there's
Let me
Mike.
get him in a second.
It is 5:37. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Let's do a roll call. John Perker,
Lonnie Ringel.
Pat Stone.
Mike
You-
Baker.
Sarah Thompson.
Sarah is on there, and Mark, we see you. Yes. Lonnie, if you'll lead us in the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would like to thank Director Stone for handling the meeting last time. It was nice and quick, and I don't think we missed anything, so good job.
Thanks, everybody, for cooperating with me.
On to number 4, we have public comment for on-agenda items only, so if we have nobody online. Is that correct? Oh, but we do have somebody. Do you have anything you'd like to speak to about on the agenda?
She's gonna speak to as the stiff chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which moves us right into the stiff stack update for project recommendations.
So that would be Shelley Gurney.
Hi, Shelley.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. Did they get the packets of what we
Yes.
had at our meeting? So we had our meeting on Tuesday or the 19th. at 1 p.m. to review the project. So we'd actually scheduled another meeting if we needed it for this afternoon in case we had to go back and do it over. But we also got to have a very nice, smooth meeting. So if you, we looked at the funding, which was on this, the blue printed paper. If you see that, that lists the projects that were, that's the one we want to look at. Which one is which one? Here, so we had the, we were reviewing the projects and the funding source for them. And then then we were going, the next article was to rank them. But one of the participants in the meeting said, well, if there's funding for all of it, do we really need to rank it? So that took away part of the extra. So we, I'm going to have Cheryl give the overview of what that is there the particulars of the funding. We had, we recommended that the projects that there was funding that had been submitted, they were all approved. That was for the, from the providers for the funds. There's funds for that. So all of them were approved. And then the projects that had not been, that had money funding them, but had not begun, that money rolled over into the next biennium to fund those projects. Did I miss anything?
Now, do you have questions?
Okay.
So how much was rolled over?
That would be on this page.
Okay.
And it would be projects 3, that one is in process, but probably will not be expended or I'm sorry, project 4. Probably will not be expended before June 30th. Also, the project number 8 will have some left, but we won't know until June how much that will be. Project number 9 was the capital operations reserve, and that is automatically going to roll over.
What is the capital operations reserve?
It was just $5,000 that we put to start a reserve that,
Okay.
yeah, so that we would have reserve for, future projects. Just a way to get it started. Project number 10, there was only so far 30,000 of that funding that has been expended. So that leaves 312,000 based on, what might get turned in the next 2 quarters. So basically at least 300,000 of the dial ride projects will be rolled over to this next biennium. And then all of the rest of them, projects number 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way through 21, none of them have been started yet, except for project number 16, which was increased frequency and expanded hours for the Roseburg route. When we brought that back to the full 4 routes after COVID, we did expand the hours, but we have not yet increased the frequency. We are in the process of training more drivers right now, and that's where they will go once we have those drivers. So we expect to be able to increase frequency in March, and all the rest of them are getting rolled over for the following biennium. For the projects that we put forward, after the last one, having 21 projects to report on, and looking at best practices that have been shared among a lot of different transit districts, the recommendation was to have fewer projects and have them more focused on a goal as opposed to a specific piece of a goal. And so we put the district admin in there just because that's an easy way to ensure that it's not coming out of our operations budget. The project number 2, the way I came up with those numbers is it was the balance left after allocating the rest of it. Project number 3, there were 5 dial-a-rides, and you can see them all listed there that submitted operating projects. And the one to really note would be North Douglas Betterment, and they are putting in a proposal to take over the Sutherland dial-a-ride, so take over that area. So that'll be optimal to get that area covered again. And then we did put additional funding in there that can be used with the funding that's rolling over to figure out a way to fill the gaps. And we're hoping that once the RFP is complete, which we will have those turned in the middle of this next month on the 15th, we'll be able to roll a map out. We actually have a map that's about the size of this table. We'll be able to draw the different proposals for each provider that they've put on the table, and then we'll be able to figure out what we need to do to fill the gaps, because as the district, we should be providing service to every community. I have to take this off to speak.
I don't care. You can take them off. I like paying 95 cents.
So
that's
winded,
fine.
and I'm like, holy smokes, what is going on here? Okay. As the district, we should be providing service to every community within the district, because we do receive the payroll tax. And I did receive a list of the percentages for each community where those taxes are collected. And of course, primarily it's City of Roseburg, but a huge part of that is servicing the people to be able to get into Roseburg. So that's how we can look at allocating it, of course, to the entire county. So that we want to figure out how to fill those gaps. So that's why there is a line there that just simply says, fill the gap.
So what about, I noticed there weren't all the dial-a-ride providers. And I know you mentioned Sutherland, but what, like UHI and?
UHI declined to submit a STIF project, and so did Sunrise. Yes,
Yeah.
Sunrise is actually giving their notice at the end of the biennium. So June 30th will be their last day providing service. So that is one less provider, but the service that they provided, I'd have to go back and look, but I believe it's 2 afternoons a week, and they provide that in conjunction with City of Winston. So we'll be able to cover that as well. So project number 4, what I did is I took the total for the 5311 operations grant, which is the 43.92% match. And I used this project to cover that match so that we are guaranteed to have that match without having to dip into the STF funding that is typically the match for the 5310 funds, which go to primarily to the dial-a-rides. So that's part of how we were able to have enough funding to go around to everybody. Expansion vehicles. The only expansion vehicle that has not yet been funded from our previous round of STIF funding is an expansion bus. And that's part of what we would need in order to implement the route for South County. What we found, so the desire from South County, you have a question?
Jennifer Bourbon would like to know if she could get the link sent to her so she could attend.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So the desire from South County from our last round of STIF funding was to implement, and they had worked with us on a project to implement a South County collector. So basically a bus that just does the loop between Canyonville, Riddle, Tri-City, Myrtle Creek and back, and that they stay there all day long and just do that particular route.
Is there enough demand there?
Pardon?
Is there enough demand?
There is. There is.
Totally.
Yeah. So that was what they had asked for, and we were still in that process of learning STIF funding and what the requirements were. And of course, as you recall, we were in quite a rush. We had like less than a week to get all of the meetings done and get the application in when it came down to it. So we didn't get the information regarding the percentage of taxes collected in each one of the areas until after we had already submitted the application. So the project number, oh, I don't think it even got put on here.
They don't have project numbers there.
Yeah. In that.
Well, I guess it's all part of project 4, right? I guess there are project numbers, but then they're summarized below the project numbers. Are broken out.
So the only project that did not make it onto the 2019 to 2021 STIF funding was the South County collector. So there's still a need for that. And so I put that information into a route here as a new route. And then it would require a bus as well to make that happen. But when you take
And is
the,
it like a bus, like a U-Trans kind of big bus, or is it a van, or?
it would be smaller than the ones you see out here, probably a 16 passenger
little
with
ones.
three, with 3 wheelchair bays. So that, we wouldn't have to leave somebody sitting alongside the road if we were full. So.
Nobody in Wolf Creek owns a car. And if they do, they've been stolen and dumped out on the road.
Well, and part of what this does also is it frees up the dial-a-ride that goes down there and does dial-a-ride all day long. They do that, I believe, 1 day a week. It frees them up to be able to do some of those trips that are out into the smaller areas, to I keep thinking Tiller,
Yes.
So then we just have do we just have then a, you said Canyonville, Riddle, Glendale, and Myrtle Creek? That's it?
So
So do we
that's,
just go down to Myrtle Creek now? Is that what it is, or do we?
so that's, we'll have to make some adjustments.
Yeah.
Yep.
That will free up a bus. I mean, that's a fairly long route to get from Myrtle Creek, and the route that they take, I mean, it's a good hour at least.
Yes.
So free that bus up.
It will. It'll free them up to be able to do Myrtle Creek through Dillard, Winston, Green, and on more often. So
Do they reverse it on the way back, so you're not always having to go all the way around to go
yes,
up here,
yes.
I'm like by exit 103, I want to go by exit 108. Going down Riddle and Canyonville, like around.
Yeah, it actually, when we do the direct route over Roberts Mountain instead of through Riddle,
Dillard.
yeah, it cuts about 20-25 minutes off of the run. So that'll make it more of an express run. Yeah. So that's the only real new route that's in these. That's not true. That is not true.
So glad you're
So you
being
got the new
honest.
route in the south, the Roseburg and the South County, those are the 2 new routes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's the rolling over the funding for the increased frequency of the Roseburg route, and then this would be the match for that as well. And then the new Roseburg route is the one that would go through from West Harvard through the YMCA, Staples, up through past Colony Market and over by the Social Security office, and then back down and cover that area that's currently not covered. Winston route increased frequency. We're finally going to get that one started this next month. We have 2 drivers that are almost completely trained to be able to take that on. So once we do that, that opens up, it'll be hourly service to Sutherland, Washington, and wow.
I'm excited.
Sutherland would be UCC to Sutherland with 3 trips throughout the day to Oakland as well. So 1 in the morning, 1 at noontime, and 1 at the end of the day. And then for Winston, it would be Washington and Rose to Winston with 3 trips to Dillard. And so we're really excited to be able to get that implemented. And then the South County route we just covered, lifeline connections to Lane and Josephine counties. That is something that we've been talking about, and there is some connection right now with the rural veterans grant that South Lane Wheels has just started. But that is a very limited, it goes from Cottage Grove. It stops in Drain for 1 stop, and then it stops down here at the VA, and then it goes back up and on up to the VA in Eugene. So, and that's 2 days a week. So what we would do, we were looking at doing 3 days a week for that connection between Lane County and Josephine County. So we would do the 3 days that are not covered by the rural veterans.
Does Coos County, do they go up to Reedsport?
They
Or is it only
used
Delaware?
to, and actually, I believe they do have one now that runs all the way from Coos Bay to
Florence?
Florence. Mhm.
They do.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, yeah. And then the no fares for children and students grades students through grade 12. Part of the requirement of the STIF funding is that we allocate at least 1% of the funding to help high school students. And so this is one way to be able to meet that. Currently, well, pre-COVID, we were running anywhere from 250 to right about 300 students per quarter, high school students that we were providing rides for. So it was increasing, and then we had COVID. So I am not sure what that number is now, but I'm sure it's lower than what it was. Okay, any questions?
On the shelters,
Mhm.
is installation in part of that?
It could be. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a number of places that have requested shelters, and we haven't been able to, because we didn't have the funding allocated for it, we haven't been able to meet that request. So,
But
Wait
last
for the
time
one
we-
outside the library, by the way.
so that is an unusual situation in that
What is that one?
I can't purchase it
Mhm.
because I don't have a contract with Cow Creek, and I haven't been able to resolve that.
So if you develop the South County route though,
Yes, then I can do what I want to do.
Okay.
What we want to do collectively as a whole for the best of the community. Yes.
Yeah, I just remember last time we got a grant for the shelters years ago, and before your time. And they didn't put any money in for installation or the building of the concrete pads. So we got the city of Roseburg to donate the concrete pads and Wolf Creek Job Corps for some of the other ones. And then we got a bunch of Boy Scouts to do eco
the
projects
rest?
and do the rest, yeah.
Ooh.
So.
All right. So, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any more. Otherwise, what we would need is a motion to either make any changes that you'd like to make, or
so you said you had enough funding to do all of these projects that have been listed.
If there are additional funds that come available unexpectedly or whatever, you know, if the feds do something or something happens, did the committee get back together too? Is that what the process is, to discuss where that would go, or how's that work?
as long as a project is on the list, then we can put the money into any project that we have on the list.
You can increase the number of projects. What if there was another project? Would there be another call for projects, or?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, it would have to be on the list. So if there's something that
Hey,
is, go ahead.
well, I was thinking the first time we went and did this, we had our 100% list and our 130% list. So are there not additional projects that we could fund later if funds are identified?
So there are funds that are identified in our PTSP, our Public Transportation Service Plan that we did. But that even though we adopted it, it is not considered an up-to-date adopted plan. So we would need to put those projects on the list and as just unfunded projects. So
after we do our master plan, there's projects on there, we could amend this as unfunded or something. Is that what would we amend this list, or we just?
we would want to put them on the list before the application is turned in and the
Right, so that
application.
we've got it on our, okay.
Yes.
Recruitment and retention, where are we with how many drivers do we have?
So right now, as of today, we have 30 employees and I believe, are we at 20 drivers? I would have
We
to.
didn't study for that.
Okay, well,
Where we are though, is we do have enough drivers that we have filled all the routes that we were previously covering with backup drivers. And we still have 2 backup drivers. So we are definitely making forward progress and we're getting there.
good to hear.
Yeah,
Good to hear.
it's exciting.
How long does it take to train a driver once they come on board to being ready to drive?
It depends on the skill level of the driver. So some people come on board and they have their Class B CDL, they have their passenger endorsement, and they they retain things really well, and you can get them out there and driving in a week and a half, 2 weeks. And then do ongoing remedial training, to the continuous training to train to proficiency. Somebody who has already learned how to secure wheelchairs is going to be able to get out there on the road much quicker than somebody who hasn't. They're just different levels. We have also, in times of we have to hold on to a driver no matter what, taken as much as 6 weeks to get somebody out on the road because they just were not able to retain at a level that we felt confident letting them go or they felt confident going on their own. So, but I'd say the average is right about 2.5, 3 weeks. Yeah. Any more?
So this is needing a motion for approval.
Approval of the recommended projects for the STIF application.
So I'd like to recommend the motion to approve the 21-23 UPTD STIF project recommendations.
Molly makes a motion to approve the STIF recommendations. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Mark or Sarah? All in favor?
I'm good.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm not voting for conflict of interest.
One abstention. So are we all here? We are all here.
Yeah.
So 6 yeas, one abstention.
You keep looking for the fly in Mark's head.
I looked at it.
Motion carries.
That's all it needs.
Before we move on to 6, I just sent you an email with an attachment. Page 4 and 5, I think, are the important ones, if you're able to separate them. Otherwise, if I can get 7 copies of those. Moving on to number 6, board training with our attorney, Ron Spury. He did have a special request before the meeting started that we try to make this last at least 4 hours, 5 if we can. So if anybody has
That's right.
any announcements, personal or, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Ron, you have the floor.
Jokes that, I don't know, I'm a fan of Norm Macdonald. He tells the longest jokes of all time. Anyway, check it out. He'll tell a joke for 15 minutes that has a really simple catch line. So I provided a kind of a visual aid. I joked something for you to draw on while I'm talking. Do we have any extra copies? I brought 10 and I forgot to keep one for myself.
There's one right here.
Of just the
No,
handout that I brought.
yeah.
Oh, that.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I apologize, hello to everybody remotely attending. I see Mark heard another attorney was gonna talk, so he took off because he knows what's about to happen. And hello to the board. Where do you guys want these? I'll just stand over here in the
Wherever you
corner.
feel
You can
comfortable.
take your mask off if you want, now that I have this on, I don't mind at all.
It's a little easier to talk.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. So I'm not sure where, so this is some really basic training. And it was prompted by a situation that happened in November about some questions on how the board versus GM officers are all and committees are going to interact and are going to, I guess, help direct the broad, broad goals and outcomes for the transportation district and then the day-to-day. And so I'm going to preface, I guess, my comments on the board needs to decide as a board where that line is going to be versus for how much control does a GM have on day-to-day and some of the bigger picture stuff. How much control does the board want? Because some of this stuff, if the board wants control over, the board needs, or a committee would need to meet weekly with the GM. I know that some other boards, I think Coos County Electric years ago, they had an executive committee chaired by the president or the chair of the board with two other members that would meet weekly with the GM to discuss contracts, So really the issue that I wanted to bring up are what is the mandate of the board? What are the rules or what are the expectations for officers? And really, how do those conflict? How do we go forward? And so what I titled this was Board of Directors and Officers Overview of Duties Relating to Corporate Governance. I call it corporate because this is technically a corporation. And so the Board of Directors has a dual mandate, meaning your role is advisory and to provide oversight. So to consult with management regarding, so I call management, that would be if you had a chief financial officer, like if you had a lot of boards eventually get one, somebody who manages all of the finances and reports back, the accounting department is what I call it. I think, is the GM handling all of that right now?
Right.
Okay. And so that's also the GM, their management. So your role is to consult with management regarding strategic and operational direction. So you guys say, this is our goal, like just what you did with, these are the stiff projects we want. Now, GM or CFO or whoever, go make it happen, get the application done, make sure we qualify, make sure we're providing the services that allow us to get the funding and maintain those projects. But the board needs to decide at some point what the culture is going to be here, because boards have different cultures everywhere. And the purpose of this training is to give you a general outline of what usually boards do, that they separate the board's duties from, say, officer or GM duties. So oversight, to monitor company performance, reduce costs. And I'm putting here, effective boards satisfy both the advisory and oversight function. The advisory really is just, and I was going to have the whiteboard because we don't have shareholders, but actually maybe I'll come behind Cheryl. So this board answers to the public,
Just don't
right?
trip.
Your customer, your shareholders, your boss is the public, right? So instead of shareholders, I always make sure these are dry erase, not permanent. So I like to draw this graphic. Normally this would be shareholders, but I'm going to say public. Okay, and then the public has, oversight by the board. How does the public have oversight over the board?
Voting.
Exactly. You guys are elected. So, and I apologize, I'm left-handed and I'm standing in the way of half of you. So then the board has a chair, right? And so I draw this graphic just to show that. So the chair is an officer sort of, but basically the board chair has more authority than, say, a CFO, a CEO, a GM. And if you needed to know the hierarchical structure, these two go hand in hand, but really the chair is the top person in charge, really. Because either the GM reports to the chair on the executive committee or monthly reports to the board on what the GM's doing. answers questions about things that the board, we had 45 complaints last month about services. Let's talk about those districts that were complaining, what the issues were, was there, and so that's an example of the GM reporting back. So here, the board then would have subcommittees. And I'm not entirely familiar with, so I'll just put and the great thing about committees is that it gets rid of the need to contact every member of the board to look at a situation and evaluate it. Because each subcommittee, and we'll get to that, I've got a list of possible subcommittees that you could form. That way, the board doesn't have to convene every time somebody needs to make a decision on finance, like if there's a finance committee, or if they're, what did I have in here? I've got, let's see.
Sometimes there's like a technical advisory committee. That
Right,
looks at
audit.
Stuff or,
Yeah, you guys could have a risk, environmental policy, science and technology, legal, ethics, compliance, mergers, acquisitions, if this was like a big for-profit, management and development. Pretty much you can have a subcommittee and call it whatever you want, but it's broken up into I would recommend more than one person on that committee, unless that one person has direct oversight, say over a portion of like if you had a committee for the dispatchers to talk about, okay, are they being trained? How's their demeanor? Like maybe you would just, but that's probably under the GM's purview. But the board really needs to determine that, because what happens is, and so is everyone kind of familiar? So I sent an email out last November to Cheryl, but I wasn't sure.
I didn't work.
Okay, so there was a question. There was a question about where is. You guys have seen these charts. So in the intersecting area, like you might have the GM, you might have the chair, maybe you have the board. You guys have different spheres of responsibility, but they do overlap in certain areas. And I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a specific district that, for whatever reason, is hard to serve. There's complaints or service providers in that area drop the ball, or something happens where you're getting a ton of complaints. Now, in the situation in November, my understanding is a complaint came directly to the board. And the board needs to decide how that's going to be handled. Is that going to be something the board takes up and deals with? Or do we say, okay, general manager, here's the complaint we got. You need to evaluate it, take a look at it, and we specifically want you to report at the next board meeting what we're doing about this issue. Or does the board want to form an executive committee that meets with the GM every week to discuss these issues? So that's not something that, I can tell you what I would do, but that doesn't matter. It's what the culture and the board is and wants. And the reason why this is important to flesh these out is so that it doesn't feel arbitrary. Meaning, so it doesn't feel like every time something happens, we make a snap or ad hoc decision that affects how the general manager now operates, or the general manager doesn't do something that the board thought was its purview or that the board should have authorized or done. And it creates a regular system of checks and balances between the board, officers, and what I call management. And so, and if this is like so basic, you guys have already had like 4 classes on this, like feel free. I don't want to be condescending or act like I know everything. Like if you guys already know this, I just, we can go to the next part, talk about.
You have 3.5 hours left, so.
That's great. I appreciate the optimism here. So looking under oversight, I put these bullet points down just as general guidelines. The board establishes the mission, the goals, the policies, maintains the integrity, independence of ideals. So if you guys have a mission statement, the board is in charge of making sure that mission statement's accomplished. And the board doesn't allow individuals or other organizations to compromise those principles. Because we'll get later, is one of your duties as a board member, or 2, you have a duty of care to the organization to, okay, we've got a mission statement. We were, depending on the district that maybe voted us in, or the voting block that put us in here that specifically has needs and wants, we're going to try to maintain or try to use best efforts, like Cheryl said earlier, to beneficially impact the entire community, not focus on one special interest, not focus on one area or one group. Like you guys aren't just, Roseburg, that's where we're going to cater to. Well, that's fine, but people can get services in Roseburg because I can typically ride a bike or walk almost anywhere in like the 7 or 8 miles that encompass Roseburg or however big it is. But people in Azalea can't. People in outlying communities can't. So your duty is to everybody in the community. You also owe a duty of loyalty, and that's where things can get a little bit conflicted. Like when we had an abstention earlier for conflict of interest, it was great. You didn't have to state the conflict, just that I just want to make you guys aware I got a conflict on something. You're going to abstain because you have a duty of loyalty to this organization, not any other organization that you belong to or are a part of. And if your involvement in another organization creates, it can create too much of a conflict where you need to reevaluate which one of these you want to belong to. And I'm not saying that was part of an issue. We'll get to that part later. And those are the last 2 bullet points I put on there, was the duty of loyalty and the duty of care. So the duty of care is really important. Be knowledgeable about what service you're providing. Like you guys sound like you were talking about the districts, you're talking about routes and I heard questions. Sounds like the board does generally understand the map, and things like that, but get to know it, understand how those services are provided, understand how dispatch works, understand how, and that doesn't mean like that you need to, I guess, drill Cheryl every board meeting on how something works, but it could, or you could ask for a report. Okay, we've got 12 meetings a year. We want you to report on some of these issues or tell us what's the generally accepted practice for this area. We don't understand why we're having problems with dispatch, or we're having problems with service providers in outlying areas. Can you explain to us how this works? Or I don't know if the culture is fine, you can just come in and watch, or get some kind of understanding of how things work. Flipping the page. I just put in some advisory and oversight responsibilities of the board. Approve the corporate strategy, test business models and identify key performance measures. That's like an audit or evaluation. Identify risks, oversee risk management, plan for and select new executives, design executive compensation packages, ensure the integrity of published financial statements, approve major asset purchases, protect company assets and reputation, represent the interest of, it says shareholders, but it should say of the public. Okay, because this is even public trust when you're elected. Ensure the company complies with laws and codes, reveal culture and tone from the top. That wasn't a big one for me, because I think that the board being new, you're in your 2nd year, right? We're starting the 2nd year or 3rd?
Technically, we're 3rd.
That's right. The first year was kind of
21, yeah.
That's right. That's right.
2.5 years.
So you're forming an identity. You're forming a culture. Now I know that elections may change the dynamic in that, or as individuals decide not to run or to run again, that may change the dynamic. But overall, the culture of how this works, whose roles or how they intersect, where do we want to be? Generally, what I see is that the board or a board meets at least monthly. That overall there are performance reports, maybe a financial report, questions, and then overall large, big policies or approvals of certain projects are discussed, and that there's a report from the GM, and that day-to-day operations are largely handled by GM or staff or a CFO, unless the board decides, okay, if you're going to make a purchase of a bus over X number of dollars or an asset over X number of dollars, you need board approval. Like you guys can set policies like that, and you probably already have. And so, or if you want, you could say, well, for instance, like salaries, not the management, but you can say, all right, we would like to be in this range on this type of employee. We want to be in this range because we think it's competitive on this type of employee, drivers or whoever that you guys are hiring. And then the GM will go negotiate with that person. And as long as the GM's in that range, they're following your directive. And so this goes to all aspects of the organization. It's about the stiff funding projects. It's about how service providers are paid. You guys can set the general policies and tone, which gives the GM or the CFO, if you guys end up having one, the direction and the parameters, the goalposts, I think we often use. And so up to this point, do you have any questions about, like, so I know that you guys have been operating for 2 to 3 years, or you're in your 3rd year.
Well, we're technically in our 3rd year since we were formed, but we've been,
Right.
you know, I mean, in some ways, we're in our first 6
Oh,
months or first
right,
year,
right.
you know.
The first year, I know that it was Mike and a small group of people that were doing a ton of stuff. And then the board formed after. It was kind of weird
The board
because
formed before.
But we did a whole bunch of paperwork getting ready for before everything was turned over.
To become a, yeah.
Right.
before
I think
we
that's
took
what
it
it
over.
was.
Yeah.
So initially, for instance, I had a lot of communication with Mike because nothing had been turned over, and it was all projected, and we were trying to get things going. But now that there's a board, I mean, what do you view your responsibility? What do you guys right now? Where do you guys think you're at? Is the board split? Is there a philosophy that you guys are trying to develop?
I don't think there's much split at all on the board. I think even radicals like myself have been accepted.
Great. So how do you view your role in the organization? Do you view your role as needing to have more of a hand in day-to-day operations, less of a hand? Do you like the balance you've struck? I don't know. I'm just curious because last November, there was, I don't know if you want me to discuss, the issue was some complaints were made. And then the question became, should the board get directly involved in complaints? This is the first time complaints have been made, or should we, we need to investigate the complaints about service, should they be handled to the GM? And then if we don't get a satisfaction, if Cheryl comes back and is like, oh, I didn't do anything, and then the next month, I didn't do anything, or I looked into it, talked to these people, what kind of reports are you getting back? So where do you guys feel like you want to fall into that? Do you want to have direct oversight of daily operations? Do you feel like you need to, or do you feel like you don't need to?
I mean, I think we should, just because we're a new board, a new organization altogether. And in November, when everything happened, we had several providers come that were really unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
Lonnie, I know you weren't here then. We had the chief of police and the mayor of Bridgeport and the service provider there, along with others here.
I think that was way back before. Yeah.
So,
20.
sorry, November
sorry.
of 2020. There were some complaints about, well, there were some things were administrative, right? Like how service providers are paid. And so that needed to be addressed because there were actually some things that needed to be adjusted. But this was, if somebody has a complaint about, say, rides just not showing up even after we called or ordered.
I think all those need to go to the management, to the operations of it.
I think we were told by the state that we were not to put our nose in it.
Yeah.
So
the state weighed in? Okay.
We should be, to my opinion, we should be policy only, and all that stuff I did before was only because I had to, but it was way outside the scope of a board chair. I mean, I was way out there.
That was very.
So that was.
So you were
really,
talking about something maybe that was a little more serious than what.
But it was really unusual, and I think complaints should go to the general manager first.
I think
Or the operations manager first.
I
before
agree
They go
that
to,
they should go.
before they
there.
go to, I mean, they would have to rise and, I completely disagree with all of this stuff, and, maybe like an appeal kind of a decision of the manager to the board. I think that's appropriate.
Right.
But I think generally they go to the manager first.
And I'm not saying there's I'm not asking you guys to I just want to know, I'm trying to foster a discussion on this.
Just
topic.
everything I did, that's not what you do.
Oh.
So myself, I think that it's, there needs to be some reasoning, reasonable aspect to it. If somebody's complaining that there's a driver that wears too much perfume.
Right.
The board doesn't need to know about that. Even if it's a continuing issue, that's something that the general manager or operations manager can take care of.
Yeah.
If there's larger scale issues, even still, the manager can take care of those. But if they're repetitive issues that are of a major scale, something that could actually bring suit,
Right.
or public outcry,
Right.
then that's something that the board should probably be made aware of and could be brought in by a general manager's report.
Mhm.
And you know, if there's ongoing issues with the perfume thing, that could be something that could be worked into a manager's report for why it's being
Still-
handled the way it is. But yeah, I think everybody's
But we are
saying the
publicly
same thing. There's-
elected and people know who we are and the
Right.
citizens, the public can track one of us down and complain to us, then we have to carry that to Cheryl.
And I think that's the best way to do it, is to handle it with your constituency or however you view it, is you say, oh, that, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I will pass that on to the general manager. And that person would tell you if they were contacted or if something happened. But for instance, I sent an email to Cheryl, and one of the things I said was, not every single complaint needs to be addressed. The general manager can, if the board decides, can say, okay, I looked at this. This is a really specific thing to this person, and I can't do anything about it. This person's gonna have this issue, and we don't need to change anything. And so then, but if you keep getting complaints, say from one specific individual, then it can be addressed so that the board can ask Cheryl directly, and it's addressed at a board meeting, so that there is, like you said, I guess, what's
It's
the word?
probably best to be
Accountability.
aware of something.
Because people are going to hold you guys personally accountable for
Right.
what an employee does, because you're public. And the way to make that trickle down, no offense to Cheryl, is to get a hold of Cheryl, let her know that's an issue. But if the board, you have to be very careful what you say when somebody makes a complaint, because it'll be taken as board action, probably. So if you say, hey, that's not okay, that should stop, and then you find out, oh, we can't, because there's a procedure we have to follow, or whatever it is, that we actually can't, you're gonna have a really upset individual in the community. So
I think the other part, Ron, is that, we have public meetings, and so, you have public comment, and that's
Right.
where you get a lot of it, is just pops up in the public comment.
and you can't really deal with it at that time either.
The
I mean, you have
question
to
is,
say,
how do we
"Great, we wrote
respond,
it
I think,
down."
as a board,
Mhm.
when they're saying those things.
Well, so I
Not agree.
guess my view would be that instead of so somebody might bring something up that two board members feel very strongly about, and maybe someone on the board is like, it's not an issue, and somebody else on the board is just like, I don't even care, that discussion probably shouldn't happen. It should be, okay, we've taken that down, and we're gonna have our general manager address that at the next meeting.
And they'll get back to you. I
Right,
think they need to
exactly.
communicate with them in between.
So
the
she's gonna
meetings.
look at that, she's gonna, and I guess,
Generally, I don't think we should take action
no,
out of when you hear a complaint or an issue, because there's almost always
Well, I
another
think it
side to the
depends on
story.
the issue. I mean, it's something.
if murder happens, you
major.
should take,
I
Yeah.
think generally the manager needs to take time to understand what the issue was, and is there another side of the story or not, and work with them to do that before it comes back to the board for anything. There may be something there.
I agree, unless they've already been to the general manager about the
Correct.
issue and didn't get what they wanted, and
Correct,
so
yeah.
then they come to the meetings and speak up at the meetings. And
right,
at that point, if we want to send it back to the general manager, then I guess we could just circle around and do that again.
you know,
Right.
and with a request to have a report come back at the next meeting,
right,
so that now they've got time they just need to be able to have time to look at the stuff, I think, and be able to respond.
Yeah, I just think it's important when the public comes and said that they've already tried to address this issue and nothing's happened,
Yeah.
that we can take action to show that we are elected officials for the
Sure.
community for a reason.
And my recommendation would be, when you hear something like that, is to say, thank you, and verify. So because one of the issues is that maybe there's this concern, that, okay, Cheryl has to self-police herself. So is she going, no, I'm not saying you wouldn't, but, or let's just say, Ron, I have ethics rules, but if I violate an ethics rule, I'm supposed to report myself. Am I gonna do that? Right? There might be a question about that. That's why if somebody does, like what Jennifer's saying, if somebody brings one of these issues up and says, well, I've tried to contact, maybe Cheryl hasn't even heard it, maybe she has, that's when the board can say, okay, we'd like a GM's brief report about this. And that report can go out, I would say it can go out during the normal course of, like, she could get to you next week, the board can decide to put it on the agenda or not to address it. Or that can be, the GM can be instructed to contact that individual and say, this is the board's, this is how the GM's gonna resolve it, or if board action needs to happen. If it's like the 10th time, a service provider or a group of service providers have asked for something to, a complaint, okay, well, then maybe the board needs to set a policy that the GM has to follow. But when you start getting that, the whole reason I wanted to bring this stuff up is that if your GM feels that everything is like there isn't a clear definition of what the roles are,
Christine,
then they don't act.
did you get that message?
They're too scared. Yeah, I have a
Do
PDF at my office. We could scan it real quick if you want. I don't know.
Sarah, we just saw
It's
your
fine. I think
message.
we're way past that.
I apologize, everybody. In my mind, everybody's gonna be here, so I didn't email it to Cheryl before. But I can make it, I'll forward this to Cheryl so she can distribute it, or,
I can send her.
okay. And so as the culture develops here, it's helpful to just, even if you had a board meeting, just say, okay, how do we want to define these? Do we, what do we want to do? Do we want, an executive committee is one way you can satisfy both worlds, where an executive committee might, but then it would require you to be here weekly. Whoever's on that committee, I would say it's got to meet weekly. You can't be a monthly, because then why have it? You're just a board. So you have to determine, are we going to do that? Do we need that? Are we sending signals to management that we want them to act independently and use their, the directives we give them and whatever, we hired this person, let them have some independent ability to use independent action, or do we not want them to act and always come back to the board? Because the issue is, if the executive committee meets weekly, then those issues can be brought to the board weekly, or at least to the committee, then that committee reports every week. That's a totally reasonable solution if the board feels that they need to have a, I guess, more of a,
More hands-on.
or just more reporting more,
I just
more
think that's-
frequently.
That's dangerous.
It is, because the board needs to, so that it's dangerous in my view for a couple of reasons. Your manager will stop acting and wait every week to do something about something. Now, that might be okay if we're talking about lease renewals, service. So you guys have tons of service contracts that are renewed annually, right? And then there's small tweaks to them. Okay, you guys can set the policy how those are handled. Do we need to approve so when a lease is coming up, do we need a policy that says 60 days before the lease is up, the board takes a look at it, reviews it, says, okay, we need to change this? Or really service contracts, have these been updated? Are we complying with the stiff funding requirements with these service contracts? Because there were changes that needed to be made to several of them because they were too vague. Yes.
So I remember John had made a request to start like a subcommittee for service provider contracts. But
Form
we
the
got,
committee.
to form a committee. But we got an email back stating that you said that was too hands-on for a board.
So what the issue that I saw was that every single so it's a form, it's literally every service contract is the same form. In my view, what the committee should be doing is looking at that form annually or on some basis to determine whether this form should be changed. But not look at every single contract and say we should sign this or not. Because the GM's because that's a board meeting issue. The GM can report and say, okay, in 2020, we had 15 service contracts. And give a brief summary. We changed 3 of them because they were too vague and didn't qualify for stiff funding. So then maybe the contracts board says, we need to look at all of the contracts in total and fix our form or make a policy about how these are going to be handled. Now, my advice was based on a philosophy of letting the GM have a lot more independence. You don't have to follow that. Like that's not a legal requirement. So as the board forms an identity about how you guys want to fix these circles about whose authority over, where the overlap is, You could form a contracts committee that says, I mean, if you want, you can say, we want to review every service contract before it's renewed. You could do that. I think that, again, it runs the danger of making your GM, I don't want to use the word impotent, but that's really, the GM just is, you're paying somebody to just sit there and wait to be told what to do. Now, that also sends signals if, and again, this is not a reflection on anybody here, if you don't have confidence in the GM, well, that's what the annual review is for. That's right. And you're going to have an executive meeting. And if it's so bad that you feel like you have to have a committee for contracts and for leases and for, well, then it's time to reevaluate what you're doing or what the GM's role is, what your role is. Because if you want a GM that just waits for board approval, it creates a really cumbersome process because you have to, every month you have to meet, decide all the issues that came up, tell the GM what to do. The GM, and in the meantime, I mean, you're paying this person a salary and you're doing their job.
Well, my personal opinion is that contracts are legal documents and there's a lot of legalese in those and you know, we can spell out, you know, the services or the, you know, the whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing a little bit, but most of it's boilerplate. And
Right.
It needs to be boilerplate.
So the contracts committee can say, for instance, Ron, we want to meet with you and go over the form contract and find out. So we had, you know, there was an issue about how payments are handled at the end of the quarter or during the quarter, right? And the timeframes, it was actually kind of a big deal. Like the timeframes were huge, 90 days, or was it to get something in and then you had a certain amount of time to review that request. In the meantime, a service provider is going unfunded for like 3 months. And okay, but it's okay to change those contracts. That's something I think a contracts committee looks at, says, okay, this is super inefficient the way we're doing it. We need to get together and change it. But then every time a contract comes up for renewal, you can decide that's something the contracts committee looks at if you want, but this should be a form contract for every single service provider. I know there are a couple that have some sentences that just have to be different than everybody else's, but that's where you could set a policy saying that needs to go through. So the executive or the contract committee contacts me and says, Ron, take a look at this, get back to us. I communicate that back to them, and that committee reports at the board meeting, here's the change that we decided next year on these contracts.
And I think
And then that helps Cheryl, she just knows she can just hand that contract out and it can just be signed. She doesn't need to call John or Jennifer or Mike. I forgot everybody's name. Cat, that's right. You know, I don't need to run it by everybody. So that's one way that it can work.
So that's essentially, I think that's one of the reasons I wanted that committee to, am I supposed to shut up? Wanted that committee to be made. First off, it's our one committee.
Right.
We don't have
Right.
a bunch of things to bog Cheryl down with time or make her wait for board approval. And there were some concerns, I feel, that were legitimate, real concerns, especially with the pay and the
Right.
timeframes. So I was hoping that our committee would have met. I think that the response we got that came from your email ended up putting a halt to it and caused it to not happen. So
and
I think more clarity on what you
Right.
meant by it, what you just did,
Right.
is helpful. And I do hope that our committee will
Okay.
in the future.
And it wasn't my,
move forward with that.
and I apologize, my intent wasn't, so what I thought was happening was at the time that individual members of the board were reviewing contracts or wanted to review contracts every time they were renewed. And so if I misunderstood that, but I was like, no, that needs to be either done by the GM or you guys need to set a policy on what these forms look like. And it's inefficient to have the whole board sit here for 2 hours. The contracts committee can meet on a Wednesday or whatever you guys do, whenever you do it, and hash it out or, but the issue is going to be, okay, it's kind of like there's an issue, how do we resolve it? Now, you have to be careful because proposed language needs to be well thought out, things need to be changed. It wouldn't be wrong for the contracts committee to say, Cheryl, what's the best way to handle this issue? Because she's very knowledgeable, for instance, on these issues. Okay, we'll take that input. Ron, can we actually change a contract in midstream with a company, like, or with a service provider? Well, what if they don't want to change it? What if we want to impose a change on somebody? So then, you can ask that question. The changes that happened last year, I believe everybody, like service provider and the transportation district, agreed on. That was easy. But what happens in the case where, whoa, we've got we need to fix something in our contracts to comply with stiff funding because they come out with a new rule next year? Can we, and you guys do them on you do the stiff on a biennium, right? But say halfway through a 1-year contract, we need to tell a service provider, hey, we got to change this. And that was kind of something that sort of a little bit happened because there was some reluctance to make some changes in the contract. They didn't understand why. So the committee can decide, let's bring in legal counsel, get their opinion. Let's talk to the GM, get her opinion, and then let's sit down and talk about it. That's a great way to do it instead of reviewing every single contract as they come up. The board can set a policy. We want to have, you don't have a lease anymore because you purchased the building. So do you lease property anywhere else?
Just one downtown.
Okay. Oh, that's right. So when that lease comes up, you could have a committee forum to review. Do we want to keep, does it make sense to keep this? Are there changes that we want to make? And talk about that and propose changes if there are issues. Otherwise, where it's a standard thing that the GM handles, like those service contracts every year, as long as the contract committee has an updated contract, she just needs to be able to present those and get them signed by service providers as soon as possible, right? And maybe you guys set the policy for that should happen 30 days before termination, or that should happen within 2 weeks after termination of the contract, whatever you guys,
Well, in fairness, like the contracts that we were speaking about were ones that were handed down from Douglas County, and it was a really
Right.
Marginal contract at best.
Right.
I mean, it had like.
Well, you said
nothing
Douglas
except-
County, you didn't need to repeat marginal?
Yeah,
So,
he's thin-skinned, you got
yeah. we just-
so
And it really
Right.
was a very poorly.
It was.
And the thing
Right,
is that if
contract.
Jennifer wasn't a provider, we wouldn't have known that there was the problem.
right. But that's also, so I don't want to speak about specifics, but that also runs the danger of the duty of loyalty, because someone might have a duty of loyalty to one organization and another. Now, when I read
Well,
contracts,
I mean, basically every provider
Right.
spoke up, and then they ended up coming to a meeting to
right,
be
okay.
heard, I guess, so.
And so for me, sometimes so my opinion on some of the contracts, even if you think they were poorly written, I was reading it, I was like, no, it actually, I know what you're supposed to do. Some people have heartburn. For instance, you can, for instance, borrow money and not have a payoff date. That's a legal contract. Now, most of us would freak out. We want to know exactly how many payments, when it's due. The law says that, for instance, in contracts, you can have a lot of unstated terms and still have a contract. If you're contracted for services at a certain rate, and there's information, you're like, well, what's the total going to cost? Are we applying some special deduction, or do we pay for their costs as well? You still have a contract. I agree. These should be, you're going to find that I don't want to say attorneys because we're also human. We're not the smartest people ever either. But people who aren't used to dealing with contracts will read something and think that something that doesn't even matter. And you guys you see that all the time in your own work, right? Somebody will come to you with, somebody might close a deal without giving anyone disclosures. Okay, that's a bad policy for a realty company, but at the end of the day, if somebody buys a house, it's as is. They didn't get the disclosures, they should have asked for them. There's just things that become non-issues. And it's best to always just so if there's an issue, get a hold of my office, get a hold of Cheryl, get the input to make a decision. What I was worried about is like the board was acting fractured. There wasn't a committee, there were individuals who were interested, but then that signals to other people that we have no confidence in our GM, so she's not going to act, or we have too much confidence. It can swing the other way. Not even paying attention to what the GM's doing will put you guys in a lot of trouble, because ultimately, even if Cheryl were to mess something up, it's you guys who are responsible. You're the fiduciaries. And that means you're the business people. You have the business interests of this organization and the public's interest. And so the board needs to develop a philosophy or a way of dealing with these issues that is not arbitrary. And like you said, you have one committee. And so,
I mean, generally, because it's purchase service and we're purchasing stuff and our purchase policy has certain limitations on what a GM can do versus what,
Correct.
the chair versus the board. It's kind of nice just to have, put together the agreements with the providers and then just have us approve them at the thing. So it's just an approval of that contract, because it's like, we're the contract authority too, as the board. And then same thing for amendments, or maybe it's amendments above a certain dollar threshold or something like that.
or amendments just go to the contract committee so they're aware of it.
Yeah, because sometimes that gives you cover. So if you remember, I don't know if you remember all the issues that happened with the handoff between Douglas County, and remember UBDN had all of that, and it was really kind of convoluted, and county ended up giving them a bunch of money and all of this, but then they did, like, sometimes that's, you can negotiate that, but it goes to the board. And if the board decides to, I think it went to their board of commissioners, and the board of commissioners even gave them a little bit more money or something. I don't remember, I might have those details wrong, but
It was a mess.
but it was a mess. Yeah, the point was it was a mess, but the board provides some kind of cover for staff. And we're ultimately responsible anyway.
Right? I mean, the statements that I make are general,
Mhm.
right? Generally, the board deals with the big picture. Sets the policies, goals, says you have 6 months to get this under control, or you have 2 weeks, or you have until next board meeting to get us an answer. You guys set those because it makes you accountable to the public by making your general manager or other staff members accountable to you. That's how it's the trickle down effect, right? That's how it's supposed to work. And so if the board, at the end of the day, the board needs to decide how that's going to work and be unified at least. Okay, we're going to have a subcommittee for this, or we're going to have a special projects committee. You can do that all the time. If there's Cheryl's like, hey, we're going to go to a fancy new system, but we need to do some research on it, or we'd like to do some new system in here for how calls are handled, right? Or we're going to go back to switchboard with the plugs, something. Form a special committee, investigate it, and then the committee can dissolve. I mean, that's a great answer to satisfying the board's need for information or for having a checks and balances system. And that's really what it's about. And so that's, I put in here on the rest of it, kind of a general outline of what officers, we don't need to go over it. I mean, for instance, like, I'll just go over the president. The president or the board chair, right, is the executive officer of the organization. This, in their capacity, should preside over board meetings, serve as chairman of the executive committee if you have one, serve as a ex officio member of all other committees. I don't know if you've seen that, but in other boards I'm on, there's a past president's board, or the past presidents they sit on other boards. Recommend what committee should be formed, be a primary spokesman for the organization, lead the board in the performance of its responsibilities, be the officer to whom the executive director reports and who coordinates the performance evaluation of the executive director, right? So these are just general principles. This board, there's no law. This is just like what, 1,000 years of Robert's rules, or, of boards that have kind of just said, these are good practices. But this board, if the philosophy is different, or you want to, as a group, manage something the way you want, that's great. Make it known and stick to it. And then if you want to change it, make it known and stick to it. And that's really, I think, the crux of it. And when you have your annual review of management, you just say, this is, we're going to, we have these concerns, and the board's decided we're going to have these controls. And you can do that. I lean towards less heavy-handed. I've been on committees where we had to wait for somebody's approval like every month or 6 weeks. Our group would meet and, okay, this is what we can do. This is our action plan. These are our goals. And then we got to wait for somebody on that executive committee to actually authorize it. That was their call. but it meant we were waiting almost 12 weeks. Like, what if we had a great idea at the end of that one cycle or at the near the end? We were waiting a long time to get approval for projects. And I just found it cumbersome. Whereas if somebody has, you know, if the GM or the CFO, whoever it is, has more independent authority, and screws up, or things aren't going right, or they're not accounting to you, you can take action to fix that. And that would be my approach, is to watch as things develop. And then you got, you know, for instance, in this case, you decided we need a contracts committee. Okay, that's great. You know, but it needs to be, let's watch and see how this is developing and go from there. And that's my view. If you guys have a different philosophy, do it. Just make it really clear, so that your general manager knows exactly what needs to be brought to the contract or the executive or the finance committee or whoever. And I'm a big fan of just getting monthly reports, period. Just you report on, you know, where, okay, this month, this is the STIF funding that, you know, I don't know if you have a monthly report on, you know, this is how the STIF funding was spent. This, or this quarter where we've seen a really high increase in this type of service or this type of call. Just keep that in your mind when we start doing the budget next month or whatever. I'm a big fan of a 5 to 10 minute report every month, just generally on what happened, what's going on. We got 35 complaints. All of them were like super focused on really individual needs. It wasn't nothing regarding the system of how we're providing services or whatever. And so there, I'd recommend if there are any questions ever, I don't know how well you guys are communicating. Like I've been on boards where something came up and the whole board was just sent an email. You have to be careful because, for instance, if 3 of you got to lunch, you guys had this training, you got to lunch and you start talking about issues, that's a board meeting and a decision is made. Like you just have to be really careful. Is it 4? 4.
Yes,
Okay.
it better be 4.
Yeah, you're like, it better be 4 because 3 of us are totally conspiring. So emails could constitute a board meeting and a decision. But the board can't operate that. It could operate that way if consensus can be reached and everyone's pretty good at checking emails and making sure they get back. So then the question is, are those emails, can the public get those? Probably. So you just have to be really, careful what goes in those. But overall, I've been on most of the boards I've been on, as they create an identity, you'll see what things work and what things don't, what things we need to have oversight. This is a new thing in Douglas County, right? I mean, a transportation district. So I don't know whether are certain members of the public watching. Do you ever hear back from the commissioners? Do you ever hear back from the county, right? If we are, is this an issue?
We
the
send
board?
Catherine every Wednesday too.
Okay. So is this an issue that the board needs to address, or is this something we can say we've given that to our GM to investigate and we'll get back? We asked her to give us a report in 60 days. And that's the other thing is one of my biggest recommendations is you never know how long something's going to take, right? If you say we want this back in a week, well, you've just added to the huge list of things that happen every day, and so try to get input. How fast can you get this back to us? How fast can you address this? Because that'll also help you understand how responsive your management is. I need 180 days to get back. Okay. The final thing I would say is, and I don't think it's an issue here, but the board must be or should always be independent of management. So meaning, some boards are just like they exist because you're supposed to have a board, but really it's, the owner, the major shareholder's cousin who's running this place, the mafia, like, so if there ever comes a situation where the board is just doing whatever the general manager says, that's the other way, right? That's a bad situation because you're responsible, and all of you guys individually are responsible for what happens collectively with this board. So, not paying attention to finances, not paying attention to your duty to provide these services, to generate projects for STIF funding. As I was going over these STIF projects because I was wanting to understand why we needed to make these changes to the contracts that were proposed last year. So then I started just going through all these projects, and they're great, bureaucratic bundles of paper. They're really specific requirements, like really specific. Some are broad. And so I would encourage you guys to at least, as a joke, and this is being recorded, so it's gonna be on forever, but put it in the bathroom and flip through it once in a while. Like, put it somewhere where you become familiar with the projects that you're involved in directing and managing. It's a heck of a read. But, you guys just went through kind of approving the next biennium, right? That's kind of what happened.
Mhm.
How many of you guys know anything about the intimate details of at least one of those projects? Right, I'm sure you guys do actually, because maybe there's one it's where you live, right? So, hey, I'm really keyed into this one, but get to know them. And if you have any questions, give it to the chair. Is it John? Who's the chair? Oh, I was like, give it to John. He can get it to me, and I can send it back, and he can disseminate it. Cheryl will have questions, and so if you like, hey, if Cheryl sends you a question, fine, answer it, and we'll ask her about it. Or if you want it sent to John or whoever the chair is next year or the year after that or whatever, however you guys do it, just set the policies so that everyone knows what's going on. So it's clear as mud, as my dad would say. I will sometimes interject my non-objective philosophy on something. I'm human. So if you get a response from me, it's like, I don't know if that's a great idea, I'll try to think about the dynamic that I'm aware of, or just I'll try to give you this is generally what should happen. And that was the advice I gave last year, is based generally on what I see on other boards, what the continuing education classes I take. This is generally how a board functions. You don't have to do it that way, but and there's no legal ramification if you have a different philosophy. So please be mindful of that. You're like, yeah, this is what Ron said, but that's not the situation we want. And okay, let's do it. So then I know I've been talking a long time. Questions, comments, concerns, anything like that about how anything works. You guys have been at it for a while, actually, most of you.
Yeah, it feels like it's becoming more
The process.
normal. Things are settling, I think, a little bit.
Well, at least we have money and policies.
We have
and
money,
stuff.
we're getting personnel, there's
Yes,
things.
yes.
The organization is continuing to build,
Mhm.
but it feels like it's built a little bit more. Things are starting to become a little more stable.
And I can see how it felt like free fall when you guys
Mhm.
started, because maybe there wasn't a staff member that specifically had this as their job to
Well, it was just Cheryl.
figure you out. Yeah,
And
right,
then eventually
And
we
she
took-
wasn't our staff.
And then we
Yeah.
took, and then we took over, buses.
right.
And then, and now we have an operations manager, and soon somebody will have a, financial
Mhm.
person, and dispatch, and so things are continuing to build, but it just feels a little more stable. It's not all resting
Well,
on
it
Cheryl.
was
We're just
totally
having to
stable.
do 10 different jobs.
Right, and that's one of the things is in organizations, or you have that, you might have that family member, I always say, like, that just takes on everything. And then it seems like they're dropping the ball on everything. And it's a function of they don't know their limits, and not everybody realizing, hey, maybe we should all pitch in and help mom. Not so she doesn't have to do everything, or dad, or whoever it is. It's usually, in my house, is mom, right? And so it's not because somebody doesn't want to do stuff or isn't capable. It's just that there are literally too many irons in the fire and things are getting dropped. And so as you guys see that,
We wanted to help mom, but she's the only one that could drive.
well, I mean, so I always say you can do whatever you want. The law doesn't actually stop anybody from doing anything. It just dictates the consequence.
It has been a year and 5 months since I've had to get in the driver's seat, so that's huge progress.
There you go.
Yeah.
We got some learner's permits out there, huh?
Yeah.
So any other questions, anything like for instance, executive board meetings. If you we're about to have one, questions about the process, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what you do, and it seems, I think you guys have a handle on that, right?
You have to stick to the
It's
subject.
stick to the subject. It's a closed discussion. If action's taken, you reopen the general meeting. There's a motion and you take the action. But I think I've been on boards where people are just like taking tons of notes and I'm like, the public gets to see that. So, it's an opportunity to have a closed discussion, but when you take action, you don't have to say why you don't have to talk about the discussion that the action take. Now, it's not to like screw over the public or hide something, but it is a way for people to openly, honestly debate. If they could look in here and the table's flipped over and people are, paintballing each other from across the room, but then we all came to an agreement. Nobody wants to see that part. They just want to know the board, right? No, seriously,
I'd like to see it.
well, maybe. So, I mean, it's, I won't talk about breaking into the Capitol in Salem. So anyway, any other questions, concerns, give them to John, or give them to Cheryl, and I can respond. Usually it's best to text me that an email's coming, because I get, Cheryl's knows that,
You are staying for our meeting, right?
that's the other thing. I can stay or not, it's up to you guys.
The attorney shall stay.
So I can be here. All right, so thank you.
Everybody, I passed out the protocol book. If you'll just, unless you want to take it home with you, if you'll just put that, the packet that we just gave you inside the, one of the folders for future directors to refer to, that'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Attorney Man.
Sure.
Sorry.
Appreciate that. We are going to push 7 to 8 and do the agenda build after the executive session. Beforehand, I just wanted to, before we have our executive session, hand out the performance criteria before we have a report. And then we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break, just so everybody has enough time to review this, so that we don't get in trouble or off topic. The attorney doesn't even, he knows about the heart, right?
What's that?
Nothing.
Yeah, totally paying attention.
Okay. So,
Do I get one?
no. So we're going to take a 5 to 10 minute break. We will go ahead and
Close this meeting.
close this meeting while we review these, and we'll open back up an executive session when we come back
You have to announce the,
under ORS 192.660, section 2, subsection I.
to review and evaluate the employment-related performance of the chief executive officer.
What Mike just said. Thank you.
Hold your chair over.
Does anybody not have one of the general manager performance criteria? Okay.
I don't have one.
Sarah, you're not gonna be able to attend. We're gonna have to shut off the owl. Which
No,
is-
we can
Oh,
have a direct call, yeah,
Huh?
direct caller.
Is she on the board then?
We'll have her call into the phone.
Right, so she's already dropped off.
Yeah.
I think the phone's over
Yeah, so
there.
now it should
And I would stop recording.
stop the recording. Okay, that's what I wanted to confirm. And I have to close the
And I
doors
would
as
just,
well.
maybe John can have a statement that nobody on Zoom should be recording on their end for the executive.
Nobody's gonna be on.
It'll
Zoom.
be-
They're gonna have to
Sarah,
call
gonna
us
call
a
you?
hard line.
Okay.
You're gonna turn the owl off.
Yes.
That thing is really cool, by the way.
Yes, it is.
Isn't that
Like,
something?
so I was watching it as Mike would talk, it split the screen.
Yeah.
Because it focused on, are there multiple cameras in that thing?
Yes.
That's pretty rad.
So to go all the way around, yes. So the most that I, and the top,
So are we closed?
And
Yes.
see at the top
So you can
that
stop
we are all
recording if you want.
there
Okay, thank you.
at the top.